And farms, a call to arms was heard by one and all, and from the glen came brave young men to answer Ireland's call. 'Twas long ago we faced the foe, the old brigade and me, and by my side they fought and died that Ireland might be free. Where are the lads that stood with me when history was made? O Ramagree, I long to see the boys of the old brigade. And now, my boy, I've told you why on Easter morn I sigh, for I recall my comrades all of dark old days gone by. I think of men who fought in glen with rifle and grenade. May heaven keep the men who sleep from the ranks of the old brigade. Where are the lads that stood with me when history was made? O Ramagree, I long to see the boys of the old brigade. Where are the lads that stood with me when history was made? O Ramagree, I long to see the boys of the old brigade. Bravely you faced one with your 16-pounder gun. I was born in a Dublin street where the wild drums did beat, and those loving English feet, they walked all over us. Oh, and every single night when me da would come home tight, he'd invite the neighbours out with this fine chorus. Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Oh, and how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lakes of Killishandra. Come tell us how you slew them old Adams 2 by 2. Like the Zulus, they had spears and bows and arrows. Oh, how bravely you faced one with your 16-pounder gun, and you frightened them poor natives to the marrow. Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Oh, and how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lakes of Killishandra. Come, let us hear you tell how you slandered great Parnell when you fought them well and truly persecuted. Where are the sneers and jeers that you loudly let us hear when our leaders of 16 were executed? Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Oh, and how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lakes of Killishandra. Oh, the time is coming fast, and I think those days are here when those English Johnny's heels will run before us. Oh, and if there be a need, then our kids will say Godspeed with a verse or two of singing this fine chorus. Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Oh, and how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lakes of Killishandra. Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Oh, and how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lakes of Killishandra. From the green and lovely lakes of Killishandra. From the green and lovely lakes of Killishandra. Armoured cars and tanks.
Cool, everybody. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. We're going to go ahead and get started. So, my name is Brian Kim. I am one of the co founders of the People's Housing Project. I am a yellow American revolutionary of Korean and Irish descent. And I'm really excited to be here for our St. Patty's Day educational talk on the IRA, housing justice, and what we can learn from struggles around the world. The first question is like, why the IRA? Why Ireland? And what does this have to do with the People's Housing Project? The first question is like, one of the big reasons why is that one of the things I learned through this research is that so much of the struggle in Northern Ireland revolves around housing justice. Um, Discrimination in housing, homelessness issues were absolutely integral to the civil rights campaign in Northern Ireland, as we're going to get into. And given that we are facing so many of the same problems when it comes to housing justice here in America today, especially along racial and ethnic lines, I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from the housing justice struggle there. Second of all, it is a Western first world struggle. A lot of the like big revolutionary or anti-capitalist or anti-imperialist movements are in developing countries like former colonies, and most of those former, like Ireland is a former colony, but unlike many of the decolonial wars fought during the same period, it is one of the oldest colonies, and it is one of the only white European colonies on the planet. So it's in a really unique spot as a decolonial movement. But make no mistake, it is one. Three, like there's a lot we can learn, I think, from the IRA and the Irish Republican Army and their political wing Sinn Fein, which is Gaelic for "we ourselves," and it's a Irish nationalist independence party that wants to build a united Ireland. Yeah, so that's the whole. So yeah, they are they and their political wing pioneered this strategy called the ballot box and the Armalite. The Armalite is the Irish version of the AR-15. They were shipped a lot of guns by white Irish Americans from Boston and Philadelphia in the late 60s, 70s, 80s, all the way up until the Good Friday Agreement, and probably still too many of the dissident factions. What this like 26 plus 6 equals 1, that refers to the traditional 32 counties of Ireland. There are 26 counties that are part of what we call today the Republic of Ireland, and then there are the 6 occupied counties of Northern Ireland, which is still owned by the UK British government today, and for whose independence and civil rights the struggle's about. And then like lastly, the reason I want to talk about this is like I am half Irish, even though I do not look like it. My mother's maiden name is O'Connell, and my great great grandparents came here in the 1860s or 70s, following the potato famine during the period when the population of Ireland went from 8 million people in 1841 to fucking 4 million people in 1891. So we're talking about a depopulation of 50% of the people. If this happened anywhere else, they would call it a genocide. And one of the reasons why I want to focus on the IRA and not like St. Patrick's Day or like Irish American history is that like one of the sad parts about the truth of Irish Americans is that we got our whiteness by selling out people of color and other immigrants. I don't know if you remember those signs that say no dogs, no blacks, no Irish from the late 1890s here in the United States. But there was a long time where they hated Irish people just as much here, and by moving into conservative Catholic communities, Irish people assimilated into whiteness. And I think that's a damn shame, given that we are a colonized people, one of the oldest colonized peoples by the British government. Like the way that they colonized us went on to serve at like as a model for how they colonized the rest of the world. And I think that like remembering that there is true revolutionary history in every group, because for every Irish American racist like Mark Wahlberg, there are 1,000 members of the IRA and members of Sinn Fein and members of the North Irish Civil Rights Association who fought really, really hard for social justice and had strong alliances with places like the African National Congress in South Africa and the Palestinian Liberation Front. So that is why the IRA. And the last thing I want to say is just like a real quick note on like the concept of history versus objective reality, right? Because the whole point of this is what we can learn from the IRA. The first thing we can learn from the IRA, and I want this to preface everything I'm about to say, is that like there's a difference between history and like the things that happen in what you could call objective reality and the truth, right? Like the objective reality is that in the 1640s, like the British invaded and colonized Northern Ireland, killed hundreds of thousands of people, and gave a bunch of land to Protestants. Like the facts are from 1990 to 1998, there were snipers in South Armagh in Ireland who shot 15 different British active duty soldiers. So that's the objective that's the objective reality, or what you could call the history. Now, the truth is a subjective question about what those facts mean. So are the South Armagh snipers terrorists who murdered good soldiers of the British government, or are they freedom fighters trying to bring about a united Ireland? When the IRA tries to put a bomb at the Brighton Hotel, where the Conservative Party leadership, basically like their right-wing party, when they try to blow up the prime minister in a hotel bombing, like, is that terrorism, or is that just reprisals for the way that the Irish have been treated by the British for hundreds of years? And I'm not here to settle on either of those questions. What I am here to say is that the truth is partisan, and what you believe about what happened in history has a political content. Like me personally, I am on the side of Irish nationalism, the idea that Ireland should be united and that they should fight a decolonial war to its successful conclusion. Like how to do that, what that really means, I'm going to leave to the Irish people, because it is a fucking complicated question, as we're about to see. So little bit, so cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of go over the history of like Ireland itself, starting with the colonization. We're going to move through the civil rights struggle. Basically, like the period we're going to focus on the most is from 1968 to 1998. It's a period commonly called the Troubles, in which more than 3,000 people were killed. And more than 50,000 people were wounded. So the Troubles is like that typical British downplaying of the severity of what was a functional sectarian secessionist war in Ireland. There was a massive ethnic conflict between the Catholic Irish Republicans who wanted Northern Ireland to rejoin all of Ireland, and the Protestant, mostly British people who are called unionists, because they want Northern Ireland to stay in the United Kingdom with the rest of England and Great Britain. So like I said, Ireland is colonized, and it is one of the models for colonization around the world. 1600s, Ireland is a largely Catholic country and Gaelic speaking. Versus England, which by this point is a largely Protestant country that speaks English. During the English Civil Wars over religion between a largely Protestant Parliament and a Catholic King Charles, Catholic Ireland, the majority of Catholic Ireland took the side of the Catholic King, and when they were defeated, the Parliament, led by a guy named Oliver Cromwell, invaded Ireland, subdued the rebellion, and slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Irish people at sword point. It is extremely brutal, and to this day, Oliver Cromwell is a hated figure all over Ireland. The reason this is important is it demonstrates that Ireland is fundamentally caught up in the religious wars between Catholics and Protestants in England. There is an attempt to restore a Catholic monarch in the late 1680s that goes very badly for the Catholics. Once again, the Irish support the Catholic side and are fucking crushed. And this time, the King of England, who I believe is a Protestant king, basically takes this land that you see on the screen up here in Northern Ireland and gives it to English-speaking Protestant plantation owners. This region, this northern quarter of Ireland up here, is called Ulster, and it is the Protestant, you can think of, they're called the Ulster Plantations. So these are like the plantations in the New World. They are owned by landed colonized English gentry. The Irish are functional slaves on these plantations who are not given basic rights. They serve as serfs, and those are the ones who are not outright displaced from this land and not allowed to live there. The 1691 confiscation, the king confiscates more than 3 million fucking hectares of land in Ireland and just gives it out to his Protestant homies. And this is the foundation of the Protestant divide, like the Protestant Catholic divide in Ireland itself. And that is where Northern Ireland comes from. Okay, so Northern Ireland itself is fundamentally the product of colonization. One of the big cities that they build there is called Londonderry. It is like New London. It is up here on the North Irish border. It grows to become the second largest city in all of Ireland, because at this point it is owned completely. The whole thing is owned by the UK. They're just colonizing this part up here. And even though this city and many of the counties are Protestant majority still, Catholic majority, Protestant organizations run the local government, they control local politics, and they consistently deny the Catholics' rights. They also have fraternal organizations that conduct extrajudicial violence. The most famous of which is the Orange, or like one of the oldest ones of which is the Orange Order. There are lots of these Protestant Proud Boy groups that do direct violence against Catholic people in Ireland. During this time, Ireland's under what you call the direct rule of Great Britain. So they elect members of parliament there and they go to the parliament in London. There is not an independent or devolved Irish parliament. While it is under the direct rule of London, there is a potato famine in the 1840s. This disease comes and kills off most of the potato crop on which the Irish people depend. London and the rest of the UK is slow and outright unfucking willing to give more aid to the people there. And so, like I said, there are mass starvations. And between 1840 and 1890, the population of Ireland declines from 8 million people to 4 million people. And in the 1890s, because of the mismanagement and neglect and colonization from London, there becomes this movement for home rule, the development of an Irish parliament where the Irish people would be able to make decisions for themselves within the United Kingdom. And within the home rule movement are the beginnings of the Republican movement, the people who want to turn Ireland into an independent republic. So these are the people who want to decolonize Ireland and turn it into an independent state. But they have the problem of this massive Protestant population. And the reason I want to show this one is because, like, history matters, and the same population distributions that are true in 1861 are true in 1991, and they are still true today. Like, you can see the effects of colonization in the population distribution, and in some places they've become more Protestant and more Catholic. They've become more sectarian. So they're about to do home rule in Ireland, but then World War I starts. Home rule gets put on pause. Irish people start getting drafted to fight in World War I. Some of the Irish people are real stoked to go and fight for Great Britain, and some of the Irish people are like, we should not be fighting for Britain. You should stay at home and fight for an independent Ireland. There are socialists and communists in the Republican movement who are big in the Catholic defense groups, because as these homies are pushing for home rule, the Protestants found this group called the Ulster Volunteer force, and it is the first of the Protestant Proud Boy groups that exist to fight against Catholics pushing for civil rights. In response to the Protestants forming their Proud Boys with guns, the Irish form a group called the Irish Volunteers, which is a mostly Catholic, nationalist, Republican militia. There are times that they engage in gun battles, but during the war, things calm down. But as home rule continues to be delayed, there are people in Ireland who believe that home rule is never going to come, so they launch a rebellion called the Easter Rising. On Easter Day, they hold parades. In 1916, they hold parades all over the country that serve as the pretext for the seizure of key points across the country. And because there are disagreements between the leadership, like half of the leadership wants to lead the rebellion and the other half wants to wait, half of the groups launch a revolt and the other half of the group stand down. And so the Easter Rising is crushed. The people who lead it are executed. And even though the Easter Rising is massively unpopular when it happens, including with like creating a split in its own ranks, the execution of these 11 people turns them into martyrs. And they become, James Connolly and the Easter Rising becomes a celebrated moment in Irish history of these men who fought and died and gave their lives for Ireland. One of the most famous songs about the Easter Rising is this song, The Foggy Dew, which I'm going to go ahead and play.
As down the glen one Easter morn, to a city fair rode I. There armed lines of marching men, and squadrons passed me by. No pipes did hum, no battle drum did sound its dread tattoo, but the angelus bell o'er the Liffey swell rang out through the foggy dew. Right proudly high over Dublin town they hung out the flag of war. 'Twas better to die 'neath an Irish sky than at Suvla Sudalbad. And from the plains of Royal Meath strong men came hurrying through, while Britannia's Huns with their long-range guns sailed in through the foggy dew. 'Twas England bade our wild geese go, that small nations might be free, but their lonely graves are by Suvla's waves on the fringe of the great North Sea. Oh, had they died by Pierce's side or fought with Calbra, their graves we will keep where the Fenians sleep, 'neath the shroud of the foggy dew. Oh, the bravest fell, and the requiem bell rang mournfully and clear, for those who died that Easter tide and the springtime of the year, while the world did gaze with deep amaze at those fearless men but few, who bore the fight that freedom's light might shine through the foggy dew. As back through the glen I rode again, and my heart with grief was sore, for I parted with those valiant men whom I never shall see no more. But to and fro in my dreams I go, and I kneel and pray for you, for slavery fled, O glorious dead, when you fell in the foggy dew, when you fell in the foggy dew, when you fell in the foggy dew.
Cool. So yeah, that is like, so that covered, yeah, so that is one of the classic themes of Irish nationalism, to the point that Irish athletes still use that as like a theme song. Conor McGregor had that play at UFC 189. Sinead O'Connor showed up and sang it live. And if you think about like some of like the things it says in there, right? Their lonely graves out by Suvla's waves. Like Suvla is another name for the Sea of the Bosphorus at Gallipoli, where a bunch of British and Irish soldiers died in World War One. And the call is like, why did they die at Suvla? Like, why did they dive in Suvla when they could have died fighting with Patrick Pearse or Cathal Brugha, like the guys he mentions in that middle song? Yeah, it was better to die neath the Irish sky than at Suvla or Sudalbar. And Sudalbar is like in the Middle East, where they were fighting the Ottoman Empire in World War One. And it has that same energy of Muhammad Ali talking about like not wanting to go fight and die against the Viet Cong. And he says to that white college student, like, you're my opposer when I want freedom. You're my opposer when I want justice. Like, you want me to go die fighting for you when you won't fight for my rights here. I'm going to die anywhere fighting for rights. I'll die right here fighting you. So that is that energy. That is an energy that these decolonial movements need to keep. So the Easter Rising at the end of World War One spawns an independence war. In 1919, as soon as World War I's over, there are guerrilla actions by this Irish volunteer force where they are fighting both the British Army, the Irish police, and the Protestant Proud Boy groups. The British like try to hold on. They hold an election in 1921, and 124 of the 128 seats that are up for parliament go to Sinn Fein, the We Ourselves, the Independence Party. The Protestants win 4 seats in Northern Ireland, and the 124 again try to like announce that they're not going to participate in the UK Parliament. So there is a division, and they partition Ireland between the North and South. And it is so the elected leader, so they partition Ireland into North and South, these occupied 6 counties up here. The majority of the Irish Republicans signed the treaty, but there are still members of what are called the anti-treaty IRA who refused to sign the peace treaty and never acknowledge the legitimacy of the partition. And they say that no matter what, they will never take seats in the Parliament of Ireland, the Parliament of Northern Ireland, or the Parliament of the UK, because these are fundamentally illegitimate, and there should be one united Irish Parliament. This political position is called abstentionism, and it is what most of the Irish Republican groups do and believe as part of their militant struggle. And it is one of the key points of division over the next 100 years, including in 1998 when they signed the Good Friday Agreement and they signed that peace treaty, where the majority of the IRA groups agreed and there was a split again. So the reason I bring all of this up is the same reason I bring up the plantations, is to say that most of our conflicts are old conflicts. They come from choices made by colonizers 100 years ago. And we are all always doing our best, including the Protestant folks who like were born in fucking 2005, who are 17 years old today. And there are more what you call peace walls, like these literal physical barriers that divide Protestant from Catholic communities in Belfast and Derry than there were in 1998. And these 17-year-old Protestant kids who are like the descendants of colonizers are not any more responsible for where, like, they didn't choose to be where they're at any more than we chose to be where we're at. But history does matter, and it's important to remember where we came from. So how does it go in these fucking 6 counties? Not good. So this is what we're talking about here. This is Northern Ireland, the occupied 6 counties. Good Irish Republicans never refer to it as Northern Ireland. They refer to it as the 6 counties. It is a site of housing injustice, police, like anywhere that colonization happens, it is a site of housing injustice, police brutality, and economic depression for the Catholic underclass and employment discrimination. So one of the ways that they gerrymander, so there's gerrymandering of the vote and the creation of Catholic ghettos throughout all of Northern Ireland. From the partition on, elections in Northern Ireland are done where the votes go to ratepayers. So you have to own enough property and be paying a certain amount of taxes to vote. And Protestant people who control more property have more votes. They also ghettoize Catholic people into districts, right? Because in the 1950s, the Labor government gets elected after World War II. They start this big, massive housing program. They start the NHS, which is like the public healthcare, single payer healthcare in the UK, and they do a bunch of single payer public housing as well. In Northern Ireland, the commissions and corporations that are in charge of allocating the housing are all controlled by Protestants. So they only build housing for Catholics in Catholic districts, and they only allocate housing to Catholic families in districts that are already Catholic. This ends up provoking one of the first really big fights in the North Irish housing campaign, or North Irish civil rights campaign, because the Catholics are ghettoized into subpar housing where they are overcrowded, and they are deliberately done so to deny them political agency. It is exactly what the United States does to Black people and marginalized communities here in the United States. This is a tactic of colonization all over the world. Number two, the Catholics are also victims of police brutality. So the pigs in Northern Ireland are called the Royal Ulster Constabulary, the RUC. Anytime you hear RUC, it's the British pigs. They are majority Protestant, even in places that are majority Catholic populations. And there is always collaboration and collusion between the police, the RUC, and the Protestant paramilitaries, to the point that the police pass information to the Protestant Proud Boys, so they can go conduct executions of Republicans and Catholic civilians. It is grotesque. They also have, until 1968, they have a group called the B Specials, which are riot police that are like a Protestant militia that only get called up for specific violent uprisings, and they are largely used to conduct like beatings and pogroms in Catholic neighborhoods. In 1985, 96% of Protestants in Northern Ireland believed the police believed they did their job fairly, whereas only 47% of Catholics did. In 2015, 70% of white people had a favorable opinion of the police compared to only 43% of Black people. So you can see in places where the police are agents of the state, they oppress the ethnic underclass. And this is true in Northern Ireland. And lastly, like economic depression leading into 1968, in 1968, the unemployment rate for Catholics was 17%, whereas the unemployment rate of Protestants was only 6.6%. This is due both to discrimination in education, this is due to discrimination in housing, and this is due to discrimination in government jobs. For example, in 1968 in Derry, of the 177 salaried government employees, 124 were earning an average of £124,000 and they were Protestant, while only 32 were earning an average of £20,400 and they were Catholic. So the Protestants were out earning the Catholics on average 6-1, and there were 145 Protestants doing government work and only 32 Catholics, and it's because they were relegated to menial labor and government jobs. And the lesson that we can take away from this is that colonialism is the same anywhere. Like, it does not change, it follows the same patterns, and it produces the same problems. So we can look to the people who are working on solutions for lessons, both through their successes and through their failures. So the period from 1968 to 1974 is the period that the movement goes from civil rights to Armalites. That is the name of a book about Derry that I did, that I read for this talk. And just like in the United States, right, where you have voting, housing, and employment discrimination for Black people, and you have nonviolent marches and civil rights struggles, people in Northern Ireland saw that and explicitly took inspiration from them. In the early 60s, they founded the North Irish Civil Rights Association, and it is a broad group of Catholic rights activists on both sides of the Irish border who are fighting for North Irish civil rights. They have a member of parliament in Northern Ireland who's part of like a reform Irish rights party named Austin Curry, who goes and conducts a sit-in in Derry at public housing because the local Protestant Housing Commission gave a 2-bedroom house to a 19-year-old unmarried girl who was the secretary of a local Protestant unionist politician when there were 4 Catholic families with 3 kids who were on the waiting list. So the member of parliament and the families went and squatted in those houses until they were forced out by the police, and that kicked off the modern civil rights movement in Ireland. In response to that sit-in protest, the NICRA, the Civil Rights Association, announced that they were going to host a march from Belfast to Derry. And that pissed off a lot of the Protestants. So when the Catholics start agitating for civil rights, and this is a lesson that we can take for here in America, both moderate and radical Protestants get extremely angry. There is a homophobic preacher named Ian Paisley who talks about how the civil rights campaign is a homosexual communist plot to separate Northern Ireland from Ireland. And he went on to found the Democratic Unionist Party, which is currently the largest unionist party in Northern Ireland. He is also the founder of a group called the Ulster Volunteer Force. They are a paramilitary group of gun-toting Protestants that end up being declared, like the IRA, a terrorist organization. And they conduct defense of Protestant homes, and they also conduct attacks on Catholic people. At one point, the Ulster Volunteer Force gets a bunch of money and guns from the British Nazi Party, and they help elect Ian Paisley to Congress. The Protestants radicalize and continue to push for moderate unionist leaderships to resign, and the Paisleyites and the Democratic Unionist Party continue to increase in power. And just like in the United States, where you see the Tea Party kind of dragging the Republicans to the right wing in the face of the civil rights movement and Barack Obama getting elected, you see the Democratic Unionist Party deciding that the Ulster Unionist Party is not fucking militant enough, they are not holding it down, and that they can't trust the government, the current government, or the British to really protect Protestants, so they start their own thing. They are especially militant in Derry because there is a Protestant minority. And the lesson here is that people with the most to lose politically and socially will get the most radical in the defense of their status quo, especially when they're threatened. So during the Civil Rights March, Ian Paisley leads the Ulster Volunteer Force and a group of Paisleyites with help from the police. They intercept the Civil Rights March at this place called Burntallet Bridge, and backed with the RUC leading a baton charge, they fucking charge and attack and beat the civil rights protesters. And the attack happens right outside of Derry, and it makes a bunch of the Catholic people who are and Catholic activists in Derry decide that they can no longer count on the government to protect them. They can no longer count on the police to protect them. And just like with Austin Curry, who was working with a bunch of tenants unions and the Derry Housing Action Collective, like these people, just like the Paisleyites radicalize and the right-wing Protestants radicalize when the Catholics demand rights, the Catholic forces start to radicalize when they're attacked and beaten by fucking Proud Boys. Many of the tenants unions are led by Republican forces who want Northern Ireland to become independent. And it is during these tensions that there is a massive it is during these tensions that like the Proud Boys the Protestants continue to hold these parades in Derry. And during the continued civil rights marches, the police break into this guy's home while they're beating a Catholic crowd and put it, this guy, Samuel Devaney, they beat him so bad that they send his daughter to the hospital and they give him a heart attack and he dies. And the death of Samuel Devaney turns him into the first of one of many, 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 many martyrs. I don't know if y'all have heard that chant at the Black Lives Matter protest that goes, "I don't want to say another motherfucking name." That becomes extremely true here in Ireland, and we'll go over that in a little bit. He is the first of the martyrs, and it causes a split in the Catholic groups, right? Some of the moderate groups, like the Social Democratic and Labor Party and the official IRA, want to work with Unionists and Protestants. They want to unite the whole Protestant working class because they don't believe you can unite Ireland without the Protestants. And then there's Sinn Fein, who thinks that right now what we need to do is defend Catholic lives, protect Catholic civil rights, and that's more important than trying to work for Protestants. It is probably true that it is going to be difficult to unite Ireland without some sort of Protestant cooperation. It is also true that when Catholic people are being murdered, it makes sense to focus on them. As part of these civil rights marches, like so in Derry, so after the RUC kills Samuel Devaney, a bunch of the tenants unions led by this Derry Housing Action Collective barricade off the fucking city of Derry and set up what is called Free Derry. It is a barricaded, walled off section of the city on the Catholic Bog side, which is defended by armed members of both the provisional and official IRA. The British and RUC men are fired at. And during the first days of Free Derry, children are up on top of 8 and 9 story apartment buildings as young as 8 and 9 years old, boys and girls throwing Molotov cocktails down at the British and the Protestant Proud Boys who attempt to fucking cross into Free Derry. It is led by this Derry Housing Action Collective, which is led by the left-wing Irish Republican armies. And tenants unions taking land as part of an escalated strategy of the housing struggle is a fundamental lesson because they keep trying to seize these lands throughout the next 30 years. They never stop with these land seizures and these battles for housing rights. And that is the thing that fundamentally links PHP to the Troubles, is that we are started by this housing contradiction and by escalations over it. At one point, like right now, Jason Barnes Landing is functionally a section of Free Portland where we are holding down a houseless shelter village that is not sanctioned by the city. And by being willing to protect that non-violently, it represents a fundamental challenge to the state's authority. And it is a struggle over housing justice and land, just like fucking Free Derry. And one of the things, like the lesson from this is that like the less hope there is for reform, like when they see the police kill Samuel Devaney, moderate Catholic priests end up joining Free Derry and picking up guns to help defend it. And the less hope there is for reform, the greater acceptance of radical tactics like seizing land and like defending Free Derry with arms become. So after they seize Derry, they hold on to it for the next 2 years. In the middle of this struggle, the government is forced to issue this, like, the British government comes to examine the North Irish police and the RUC, and they issue this statement called the Hunt Report, where they basically agree with the fundamental complaints of Catholic people that the RUC is bigoted and shitty. And the Protestants fucking riot. The UVF goes and shoots 2 members of the fucking RUC. They bomb British installations. And it really goes to show you like how, and it reminds me a lot of the January 6th riots, where it shows you how like the thin blue line of people are absolutely ready to fucking cross that thin blue line and kill cops as soon as the cops don't agree with their right-wing agenda. The historical lesson is that right-wing Proud Boys are going to Proud Boy, especially when the cops on the scene don't do enough to smash Antifa. People go and take matters into their own hands. Like Ben Shapiro, Andy Ngo, and Kyle Rittenhouse are Ian Paisley. The Proud Boys are the Ulster Volunteer Force. And like, So from 1969 to 1972, like the year ends with these Protestant riots. And over the next year, the Protestants and Catholic groups, the IRA and the UVF, Sinn Fein and the DUP, get increasingly agitated. They hold dueling marches to commemorate their different holidays. And it leads to the Protestants having a march through the Catholic part of Derry on Orange Day, which is like the day that they celebrate the crushing of the 1691 Irish thing and like the confiscation of like basically the war that led to the confiscation of all their land and the establishment of the plantations. It's Plantation Celebration Day, and they decided to march right through tried to march right through Free Derry, or right up next to the borders of it. And so a bunch of Catholic youth, like young people, come out to have a counter march, and it starts the Battle of the Bogside. For 3 days, Derry is on fire. It is the first use of tear gas by the British Army, where they tear gas heavily into all of the Catholic Bogside in Northern Ireland. Throughout the 3 days, the RUC, along with the B Specials, and you got to remember, a lot of the Ulster Volunteer Force are off-duty cops. They are leading baton charges into the Catholic section, beating and shooting and killing the fucking Catholic citizens and IRA members. And after the Battle of the Bogside, the Hunt Report comes out. The Protestants kill some RUC guys, and the British deploy active British military to Ireland. Operation Banner goes on for it starts in 1968 and is only officially fucking ended in 2007, like in all of our lifetimes, I'm pretty sure. And it is the longest deployment of British troops in the history of the British Army. So in 1969, in Free Derry, over how escalated the military situation should get, the Irish Republican Army splits. They split into two groups, one of which is called, I'm going to put this on the fucking screen. One of which is called the Provisional IRA, the Provos. And when most people talk about the IRA, this is who they're talking about, is the Provos and Sinn Fein. These are the people who go on to become the biggest. They do the most things. And in the end, like, they are the largest party in the Irish Parliament today, and they are the largest nationalist Catholic party in Northern Ireland today. They were primarily focused, like I said, on defending Catholic people, and that wins them a lot of support among the Catholic working class. They believed in both an armed defense of Catholic neighborhoods as well as active offense against both the British Army, the RUC, and Protestant paramilitaries. That made them extremely popular among the Catholic working class. They are part of Team Abstentionism, the people who believe that even if our political party Sinn Fein wins seats, we should never take our seats in Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland, or the UK. And their goal was to inflict enough casualties on the British Army to get them to leave through bombing, shootings, and assassinations, to make it too expensive for the British to continue the occupation. And I'm going to let one of their commandos explain that in his own words.
I am a representative of the General Headquarters Staff of Ogleen na HÉireann, the IRA. Camps are ongoing. This one here is a basic weapons camp and an engineering camp. We have camps where we concentrate on sniping. We have camps where we bring specific sets of volunteers from specific active service units for their specific skills.
You have to make sure that your weapon is always very clean, because a dirty weapon could be the cost of your life. So, the barrel. remove this here and put the belt in with one round, obviously the breech, and tight against this here. And clamp this down. Is whenever the belt is, and it is continuing firing on, the way to stop it is to throw the belt over like that there. We're not going to be firing yet for a wee while. Right.
Our strategy is that through the effective use of guerrilla warfare and through continually maintaining an effective fighting force, we will eventually sap the political will of the British government to remain in Ireland. If the British government were prepared to show even one iota of leadership and were to begin moves to disengage from this country, then the conflict would cease.
Are they the same type of devices that was fired at Downing Street? The exact same device. And the ones that were fired in Downing Street had Semtex high explosives in them. 45 pound of Semtex.
How do you acquire your arms?
With extreme ingenuity, and there's no way that any representative of a guerrilla organization is going to enter into a discussion of how we've been continually supplied. I don't see any merit in discussing individuals as targets. Suffice it to say that the people who legislate for the terror in Ireland know well that they all remain targets. And I'm sure that Mrs. Thatcher, when she goes down upon her knees with a mirror checking underneath her car every morning, remembers the terror she inflicted on Ireland. There were warnings by telephone, specific warnings naming 9 railroad stations in London and saying that incendiary devices would explode within 50 minutes. The operation was not aimed at killing anyone. The operation was aimed at paralyzing London and bringing home to the British people the reality of the disruption which their military presence inflicts on the people of Ireland. When you speak of the attacks at Coshquin, the attacks at Newry, were collaborators who were actively assisting the maintenance and supply of British terrorism in Ireland. They were forced into taking bombs to military targets. Our intention in carrying out those operations needs to be seen in the broader context of operations in pursuance of the specific strategy. And that specific strategy is that we seek to render even larger areas of border terrain uncontrollable for Britain. Our operations continue at a level of at least 1 every day, and sometimes as many as 4 or 5 in a day. In the past number of days prior to this camp, yesterday we killed a British soldier and critically injured a second in an attack in Belfast. The previous evening in Fermanagh, we shot and seriously injured an RUC inspector. Several hours later in Belfast, in an area which up until now the British have felt secure in, we targeted and seriously injured a second RUC man. I mean, I could keep going on. That was just within the last couple of days. We have never experienced a shortage of volunteers. In fact, we have to turn people away so we can afford to pick and choose. And where it's impressed upon them that all that armed struggle has to offer them is the chance of an early grave or a long term of imprisonment. The volunteers of Aughly na HÉireann control large tracts of ground, and the British operate only with the backup of 4, 3, 5 helicopter gunships. And
So that is not braggadocious talk. They did all of that. And their choice to do that caused them to split with the group that is called the official IRA. who were a more socialist group, wanted to try to unite the Protestant and Catholic working classes. They were pushing for a limited armed defense of Catholic spaces only, and they were ready to abandon abstentionism in 1969. They split there, and over the course of time, there is violence between the official IRA and the provisional IRA. They spend time shooting each other and bombing each other. The IRA splits itself into a group with another. They have a split, and their split off group is called the Irish National Liberation Army, the INLA. Over the course of the next decade, they murder both of each other's leaders. And the INLA and the OIRA spend as much time fighting each other as they do fighting the British. I don't think that's the best fucking use of our time. So they escalate with these bombings, they escalate with these killings, and what the British do in response is a massive internment program called Operation Demetrius, where extrajudicially, without a trial, they start to arrest, abduct, and intern in these big prisons called the H blocks, Irish Republican prisoners. There are no trials for these people. They are held. They are treated like common criminals, even though they are political prisoners. They are not treated as prisoners of war. They are treated as domestic terrorists. They do this through a thing called the Emergency Powers Act. It shares a lot of similarities with the fucking Patriot Act. Fascism will come to white countries. Like, it's not something they're not gonna do here if we get hype enough about it. Eventually, there are huge fucking protests over Operation Demetrius and the internment, and it leads to a massacre by the British Army called Bloody Sunday. I am sure you have heard the U2 song.
On January the 30th, 1972, a civil rights march through the centre of Londonderry culminated in one of the darkest episodes of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. The events of Bloody Sunday would come to define the conflict for many and leave a lasting legacy of bitterness and injustice. So what happened on the day? By 3 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, as many as 15,000 people gathered in the Cregan area in protest against the government policy of internment, which allowed the authorities to imprison suspected IRA members without trial. Organised by the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, it was technically illegal, as all large gatherings had been prohibited by the Stormont administration. Ignoring the ban, the predominantly Roman Catholic crowd set off towards the Guildhall in the city centre. But their intended route along William Street was blocked off by British troops called in to police the event. The main march was redirected along Rossville Street towards the Free Derry Monument, but some stayed to confront the soldiers manning the blockade. As the standoff intensified, a water cannon was brought up to disperse the rioters. Bricks and bottles were soon answered with rubber bullets and CS gas. At 4:07, soldiers from the 1st Battalion Parachute Regiment advanced to make arrests. Moments later, as the protesters fled back towards the bogside, shots rang out across the city. The army claims that they were fired on first by paramilitaries in the Rossville Flats, but this has long been contested by eyewitnesses. 21 British soldiers fired their weapons, discharging 108 live rounds between them. After less than 30 minutes of shooting, 13 marchers were dead and 14 badly wounded. One of those injured would die several months later. As retaliations began with the burning of the British Embassy in Dublin, the then Prime Minister Ted Heath ordered a public inquiry. The soldiers were largely exonerated by the widely criticised Widgery Tribunal, although the report admitted that their behaviour bordered on the reckless and that the victims were unarmed. Years of campaigning by nationalists and the victims' families followed, and a second inquiry was commissioned by Tony Blair in 1998. 12 years and £200 million later, the Saville reports concluded that none of the casualties were posing a threat or doing anything that would justify their shooting. It led to a public apology by Prime Minister David Cameron in 2010.
Indeed, on behalf of our country, I am deeply sorry. I'll get that little piece of
Yeah. So that is Bloody Sunday. They gunned down a bunch of people in cold blood. So that is around the time. So in the midst of these reprisals, the official IRA declares a ceasefire, and they like kind of dissolve into the political only realm. They change their name to the Workers' Party and kind of go on to be a marginal force on either side of the border. In response to the riots and the IRA escalations after Bloody Sunday, the British do this thing called Operation Motorman, and with a bunch of armored cars and tanks, charge in and crush Free Derry, and like the occupation ends. The British, like the North Irish government, tries to make concessions to the civil rights movement at this point because people are being shot in the fucking street every single day, and bombs are going off and killing policemen every single day. Catholic civilians and their bars are being bombed by Protestants. Protestant organizations and their like gathering places are being bombed by the IRA. In 1972 alone, there were more than 500 casualties, including 130 British soldiers. And this leads to the North Irish government to try to make these reforms, and the unionists in Belfast and Derry go on strike. It causes the collapse of the government. They can't reconstitute a North Irish parliament, and the British government is forced to take over directly. They deploy a bunch of British soldiers, which continues to escalate the conflict. It is an incredibly violent and traumatic time. Like I said, more than 3,000 fucking people die. And over like the next 6 years, just to kind of give you guys an example, like 5 Catholic civilians were killed in a Ulster Volunteer Force gun and grenade attack in Belfast. A member of the OIRA was shot on Falls Road in the feud between the Irish National Liberation Army and the OIRA. 4 British soldiers were killed by a provisional Provo bomb in County Armagh. Provo volunteers carried out a gun and bomb attack, a bar frequented by Protestant Proud Boys. 4 Protestant civilians and 1 Protestant Proud Boy were killed. So like, even the times where like the Republicans, who I generally could like the IRA, who I generally consider to be the fucking good guys in this story, are like trying to get the Proud Boys, like it is a bloody and fucking fundamentally unpleasant time. And like I said, 3,000 people die, more than 50,000 are injured. And it's like in the speed, like I was gonna try to like highlight some of the big events, and I'm like, the Bayardo bar bombing, the Caterham's Arms pub bombing, the London Hilton bombing, like the PRIR blew up a hotel and killed 2 people and injured 63. The Wilson restaurant bombing. Like there are so many bombings and murders. The Ulster, the Protestant Proud Boys shot 6 Catholic civilians to death. There are so many murders and reprisals and martyrs that it entrenches these 2 communities in consistent patterns of bloodshed. And it is like the Crips and the Bloods with a religious, ethnic, colonial foundation that does not result in anything but consistent violence. It is traumatic for a lot of people. What the IRA is trying to do during this time is focused attacks on soldiers, Protestant Proud Boys, and politicians. Like I have read, they are not always successful. One of their so the highlights of some of their military successes, one of the great moments in Irish Republican folklore is Narrowwater, or the Warren, what the British call the Warren Point ambush, where with a car bomb and like 30 people, they blew up 2 British soldier armor cars and like fired on the survivors and killed like 18 people and wounded 18 British soldiers. And it's the highest loss of life of the British Army on a single day in the Troubles. And on the same day, they assassinated Lord Mountbatten, who was a member of the British royal family, who was a big supporter of the North Irish brutality, who was a unionist and wanted the British army to thought the solution was for the British army to escalate the violence. So the IRA put a remote controlled bomb in his fucking yacht and blew him up. And over the course of the 1970s, they went on to kill 579 soldiers and policemen, which were about half of the people that they killed. The Protestant Proud Boys killed about 1,800 over the course of the whole time. And the majority of people killed by Protestant Proud Boys were civilians. People will try to make an equivacy between the Ulster Volunteer Force and the IRA, and they are really not the same. Around the same time, the INLA assassinates a big conservative politician and a personal friend of Margaret Thatcher. They blew him up in his home. They snuck into the personal car lot in Westminster Palace, where the royal family keeps their cars, and the government keeps their private cars, and they put a car bomb on his vehicle. And in their statement, they said, quote, "In March, retired terrorist and supporter of capital punishment, Ari Neve, got a taste of his own medicine when an INLA unit pulled off the operation of the decade and blew him to bits inside the impregnable Palace of Westminster. The nauseous Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher sniveled on television that he was an incalculable loss. And so he was to the British ruling class." 4 years later, the Provisional IRA bombed the Brighton Hotel, where the Republican Party leadership was holding a meeting. They killed Conservative Party. They killed 6 senior Conservative Party officials and missed Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of the UK, who was increasing the internment, cracking down, ordering the British police to crack down and increase the use of tear gas. She was basically the Lady Donald Trump of the day. They missed her by a single hotel room, and they said in a very famous statement, "You are lucky to die. You got lucky, but we only have to get lucky once, and you have to be lucky every single day." So these targeted bombings of British politicians, they took out some war criminals and some truly bad people. They also killed a lot of Protestant Proud Boys and some Protestant civilians, many of whom probably didn't fucking deserve it. And in these bombings and shooting campaigns of police were so effective that there were places that the RUC could not walk around without military support. And even the places they had fucking military support. This is the bomb that went off at Maggie Thatcher's hotel. But even the places they had support, there were times that the British Army was not safe, including Cross Maglen, where the South Armagh Sniper Brigade picked off 13 British soldiers over the course of 8 years. They used to post these signs that said "sniper at work" as a warning to local civilians to fucking be careful walking around after dark, because it was forbidden for British police to walk around, and many times they didn't. The lesson here is that any revolution is founded on bloodshed, and these groups that were formed to keep Catholic neighborhoods safe went on the offensive and did a lot of damage both to the British economy, the British ruling class, the British army, and the British police. They had a lot of damage done to them. They also did a lot of damage to Protestant civilians as they were under attack from Protestant Proud Boys. I think it is a common fallacy in first world Western revolutions is to think that the army and the police are invincible. The lessons of the IRA show that they are not. So during these assassinations, the IRA was declared a terrorist organization. Many of their members were rounded up and thrown in the H blocks without a trial. They were dressed in prison uniforms like criminals. They were forced to do prison work, but they were deliberately isolated from the other prisoners and not given access to the same recreation and education as other prisoners. So they had none of the privileges, and extra punishments. So a bunch of them started this hunger strike where they refused to eat until they were given their demands of not wearing prison clothes, not having to do work, because they wanted to be treated like political prisoners under the Geneva Convention as what they believed is a free government at war with the state of the UK. So the most famous hunger strikers is this young man named Bobby Sands, who on March 1st stopped eating on these 5 demands. He was a member of the Provos, and they made a concentrated choice to do a staggered hunger strike where every week a new one of them stopped eating until there were 10 of them who were on hunger strike. The first week of his hunger strike, a heavily Catholic county in South Fermanagh, the member of parliament there died. And so a group of North Irish people came together and they put Bobby Sands up as the candidate for parliament, and he fucking won on April 9th. Margaret Thatcher said on live television that they could basically all fucking starve to death for what she cared, and refused to meet any of their demands. This is Bobby Sands reading a poem he wrote in prison about his hunger strike, reading it. And this explains his better than I'm gonna.
There's an inner thing in every man. Do you know this thing, my friend? It has withstood the blows of 1,000,000 years and will do so to the end. It was born when time did not exist, and it grew up out of life. It cut down evil strangling veins like a slashing searing knife. It lit fires when fires were not, and burnt the mind of men, tempering leaden hearts to steel from the time that time began. It wept by the waters of Babylon, and when all men were a loss, it screeched in writhing agony, and it hung bleeding from the cross. It died in Rome by lion and sword in defiant cruel array, when the deathly word was Spartacus, along the Appian way. It marched with what the tailors poor, and frightened lord and king, and it was emblazoned in their deathly stir, as ere a living thing. It smiled in holy innocence before conquistadors of old, so meek and tame and unaware of the deathly power of gold. It burst forth through pitiful Paris streets and stormed the old Bastille, and marched upon the serpent's head and crushed it neath its heel. It died in blood on buffalo plains and starved by moons of rain. Its heart was buried a wounded knee, but it will come to rise again. It screamed along by Kerry lakes as it knelt upon the ground, and it died in great defiance as they coldly shut it down. It is found in every light of hope, it knows no bounds nor space. It has risen in red and black and white, it is there in every race. It lies in the hearts of heroes dead, it screams in tyrants' eyes. It has reached the peaks of mountain high, it comes searing across the skies. It lights the dark of this prison cell, it thunders forth its might. It is the undauntable thought, my friend, that thought that says I'm right.
Yeah. And for the courages of his convictions, he died of starvation on May the 5th. Sinn Fein to this day remembers him as a martyr and a hero. During the hunger strikes, there were more than 1,200 protests in which 350,000 people marched. They were the biggest marches since 1968. So after he died, there was another election for his seat, which Sinn Fein won, and that marks the end of their abstentionism. Throughout the 80s, there were a bunch of elections in Northern Ireland, and because the whole time throughout their military campaign, right, the Provisional IRA has Sinn Fein, their political party, explaining their actions, pushing their line, running for office. And in 1982, they get 10% of the vote in Northern Ireland compared to only 2% for the official IRA, which is 42,000 votes. And then in 1983, when Margaret Thatcher tries to have a UK-wide general election, they win 100,000 votes in Northern Ireland and end up winning seats in the UK Parliament. But they only win Sinn Fein only wins 1.2% of the vote in the Irish elections in the Republic of Ireland in the South, because at the same time they're running this military campaign that's very popular with oppressed Catholics in Northern Ireland. It is not super popular with Irish Catholics in Free Ireland. So they only win 1.2% of the election there in the 80s, and they end up they realize that in order to build a united Ireland, they want to win in both. So they end up abandoning some of their more left-wing stances, including like they switch from being pro-choice to neutral because there are many Catholics in Ireland who are very pro-life. And it is a fascinating set of lessons, like these victories from this hunger strike and also what happens to Sinn Fein and the IRA, because their policy of militancy is what leads them to electoral victory. Like the fact that they use both the ballot box and the Armalite is what wins over people who are under constant physical attack from the police and the Protestant Proud Boys and serves as a way to organize them. Like, it also shows you that down in the Republic of Ireland, the people with less to lose are less impressed by armed struggle. And like the lines that Sinn Fein has to walk with like its lead politicians denying that they're members of the IRA prove that it's really hard to balance having a political party while also having an army that's like kind of actively murdering your political opponents and is declared terrorist organization. So in the early 90s, like especially after there's a couple accidental killings of like a couple hundred civilians, they switch to like heavy economic focus damage. In 1993, they drop one bomb in the center of London that does more than 1 billion pounds of damage without killing anybody. But they are increasingly getting tired, and like as they are achieving electoral success, one of the things that like the guy who came up with the Armalite and Ballot Box strategy says is he goes, "We could fight on forever, but of course this isn't the same as winning or showing something for all our sacrifices. The whole purpose of opening up the political front in the first place was the acknowledgement that a purely military struggle was being isolated, marginalized, and not going to win on its own." At the same time that they are like reaching the like ceiling because they get 10% of the vote and they consistently kind of hit that electoral ceiling while they're running the armed campaign. And during that same time, the loyalists, like I said, with help from the fucking state government, are like the Unionists and Protestants are murdering Catholics, and it escalates. In 1983 to 1987, Protestant Proud Boys only kill 50 people, but from 1988 to 1994, they kill 224, and between 1992 and the Good Friday Agreement, they're killing more civilians and more people than the IRA. This is because there is a Patriot Act that like called the Emergency Powers Act that they set up in the late 60s, right when the civil rights strategy was movement was kicking off, that allows for the spying and extrajudicial arrest of the Irish people and their internment. So they also authorize a bunch of counterterrorism methods that involve the spying on the IRA, and they're supposed to be spying on the like unionist paramilitaries who are committing crimes, but just like with the Proud Boys, the cops never try that hard to arrest the Ulster Volunteer Forces. They tried to arrest the Provos. They murder a human rights lawyer named Pat Finnegan. I was going to play a clip from his widow, but we're low on time. The lesson is that the cops and Klan go hand in hand, and these same Proud Boy Protestant militias that were founded in the 1910s and 1960s to oppose civil rights are the same groups opposing, like, who are killing civilians and murdering IRA members in the 90s. So the IRA, one of the big things that the IRA that Sinn Fein originally split on in 69 was about fighting for Northern Ireland no matter what. And over time, the leadership, including Danny Morrison and Gerry Adams, comes to an agreement with the government of Ireland and the government of the UK that and it's a big concession for the UK to give this up, that Northern Ireland can operate on the principle of consent, which means that if it votes to join regular Ireland, it can. So the British pull their troops. So in 1998, with that being the big thing the Republicans concede to, which is basically like, okay, if the Protestants don't want to vote out, then the Protestant, like then as long as the Protestants don't want to leave and they have the majority vote, then Northern Ireland can stay in the UK. And that's the big thing that Sinn Fein and the IRA give up when they signed this peace treaty in 1998. By contrast, like the British and the Protestants pull their troops out, they create a new parliament in Northern Ireland with forced power sharing between Protestant and Catholic parties, and the principle of consent, so that if they want to leave, they can, and the Protestant Proud Boy militias have to disarm just like the IRA. When they vote, the people in Ireland are 95% in favor of it. And in Northern Ireland, it passes overwhelmingly 72 to 28, but only 57% of Protestant unionists vote in favor of it. So the unionists are really pissed off because they know that over time, the Catholics are going to be the majority and Northern Ireland's going to leave. And to them, it represents a huge shift. When they signed the Good Friday Agreement, like this is the big peace treaty in 1998, Bill Clinton's there, it's a fucking big deal. The IRA and the Protestant Proud Boys split. Sinn Fein goes on to be the legal party, and their army, the IRA that goes with them disarms, and the real IRA and they form a new party called Circe, which means liberation, and they are still going to this day. They just conducted a bombing last year. Last month, a guy was arrested on bombing charges in Derry, who's a member of the new IRA, the new real IRA, whatever their name is. So just like in 1916, the lesson here is that some shit never changes, and seems like there's always going to be a faction of Republicans who are ready to fight to the death. So that is where we're at today. What are the fundamental lessons we can take away from here? One, the truth is partisan. Whether you listen to the reform nationalists, whether you listen to the moderate Protestants, whether you listen to the Paisleyite DUP right-wing Protestant Proud Boys, whether you listen to the Provo IRA, whether you listen to the real IRA, every single fucking one of them is going to tell you a different thing about what should happen in Ireland and what is right. They will tell you about historical trauma caused by the other team and the other cause that makes it so they have to fight for that for their family's blood. And all of them will be speaking honestly from their lived experience. I think that goes to show both how deep shit can get and also like the limits of lived experience to produce solutions, maybe, especially given how much trauma it is. Specifically for us as revolutionaries, like in the housing justice space, like whether it's moderates who don't believe in armed struggle at all, whether it's disagreements about how to do armed struggle, there are always going to be disagreements in the revolutionary movement. And what I would like us to do, and the lesson I think we should take away, is that we should spend more time on the British and the RUC than we spend on each other. I mean that metaphorically, of course. And this is all, for the sake of YouTube and the Patriot Act, all this whole talk is a parody, just so you all know. Important lesson number 3, colonialism and racism are the same everywhere. When you have ethnic discrimination, it doesn't manifest itself. You can't see discrimination on the street outside of like Protestant and Catholic beatings. The places you see it structurally are in housing justice, economic justice, and police justice. And just like, and the fourth core lesson is like housing is always at the front of the big fights. Like, look at Red House here in Portland. Look at the sit-ins in Derry. Like, housing injustice, the tenants union setting up Free Derry is the reason that they were able to seize and control spaces at all. And the need of those spaces for defense is what brought the Provisional IRA to power and made it the prime force that allowed it to go on to be the main nationalist party in both. It is the largest political party today in Southern Ireland. They just won they just won the plurality last election, and they are the largest Catholic nationalist party in Northern Ireland today. But the questions all this brings up is like, what is, speaking of that, like, what does winning really mean, right? So like, did Sinn Fein and the Provos, like the guys who did all these bombings, who almost got Maggie Thatcher, who got Lord Mountbatten, who like killed all these British soldiers and like now are the biggest political party in Ireland, like, so unemployment rates are better if you look at like some of the stats, right? Just like, for example, in 1991, 29% of Catholic men were unemployed versus 13.5% of Protestant men. By 2011, even in the aftermath of the Great Recession, that number had fallen to 12.2 for Catholics and 7.5 for Protestants. So we went from like a 16-point difference to a 5-point difference, or a ratio of 2.2 to 1.7. And it's like, things are better, injustice is better. Is that good enough? Is that good enough? What does good enough mean? Is that good enough to stop bombing? Is that good enough to stop risking the lives of you and your family to Protestant Proud Boys and reprisals? Like, I don't know, man. I've never had to worry about going to a bar because it's left-wingy and the Protestants are going to throw bombs at it. And I know that because that happened last fucking week. It is a different question. Because one of the other problems is that like all of the troubles, like, you know, we have peace now, but Ireland in many ways is more disunited than ever. Sinn Fein is polling higher than ever, but there are more peace walls in Belfast and Derry. That's what they euphemistically call like the border walls that divide different segment Protestant and Catholic neighborhoods. They're 40 fucking feet high, so people can't throw bombs over them at each other. And there are more of them today in Ireland. There are more of them today in fucking Ireland than there were in 1998. There are still bombings between the new IRA and like they're called like the UUF. Yeah, so there's still ongoing violence between the new Irish Republican Army and the Red Hand Defenders and the real Ulster Freedom Fighters, the guys who didn't, the anti-treaty forces of today who didn't sign the Good Friday Agreement and want to keep the struggle going. And 90% of, even though housing discrimination has improved, 90% of housing in Northern Ireland is still segregated into single identity Protestant and Catholic fucking communities. So the prospects of a truly united Ireland remain low. And like the other thing we kind of have to ask ourselves, and like real talk, if like war is politic by other means, because I really do believe that part of the reason why Sinn Fein did well, and part of the like what kept Catholic people alive and what forced the British government to a stalemate, was the intransigence of the IRA and was the beauty of the Armalite and the ballot box, the choice to do legal and extra legal things. I don't think those things always have to be violence. But since these people did use violence, and since the Black Panthers and the Black Liberation Army did use violence, like, a question you have to ask about a violent revolution is always, how much collateral damage is ever acceptable? Like, and to recognize that there's a difference between the violence caused by the IRA and the violence done by the Protestant Proud Boys in direct collusion with the police and the British government. Because the British and the Protestants will try to tell you they're the same, and they're not. It is active war crimes on behalf of the British government, and they all know that, which is why they suppress the inquiries. So that is a lot. I talked for about 15 more minutes than I meant to and skipped one of the videos, but that concludes everything I had to say. I'm down to kick it for like 10 more minutes and answer questions. I don't know if I have put Zave to sleep. His camera is off, but he is the host running things. I want to thank everybody for being a part of that live. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts or feelings or responses? I can play some more of. I'm gonna close out on one more of those like IRA fucking folk songs. But does anybody have any thoughts or questions or feelings or things they learned? Matt, I can't. Matt's
I
Matt's
think
you're muted.
people are gonna have to raise their hands so I know to unmute.
Does it work now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ah,
Yeah,
cool.
click the little raise hand button.
Yeah, it's this is something that I have known almost nothing about, except that there has been violence in Ireland, you know, and it and it's just wild how like deeply complex this very, very small part of the world like has been, and it makes me feel like I need to know a lot more about like global historical politics. So thank you so much for sharing this. This is really, really great. The other thing that I'm like really thinking about a lot is what you touched on at the end, is like sort of like, what does this mean for us now in the terms of like infighting specifically? Like, what can we take from, like, what can we learn from all of this IRA stuff, and bring that to like what's happening like currently in the city of Portland?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think like one of the big things is like, so you look at the places and it's like, so these are the books. So I read a couple books, and one of them was called From Civil Rights to Armalites, and it was like a specific focus on the city of Derry. And they talk in the intro. Yeah, you're very welcome, Peggy. They talk in the intro about why they wanted to do a localized focus. And it's to like explore the ways in which the general contradictions manifest in a single city, right? And I think you can look to the spaces where the Provo IRA and the official IRA collaborate before and after the split, because they're not always murdering each other, and there's like times where they work together, and it's like they work together on concrete justice projects, right? Like they do things like the Derry Housing Action Committee, the DHAC, and then they end up forming the Derry Citizens Defense Council, the DC Citizen Defense, the DCDC, the Derry Citizens Defense Council, the DCDC. Yeah, so they form these two groups and they work together. And even after the provos and the officials split, there's places where they don't acknowledge the split, and especially after the internments and Operation Motorman and Operation Demetrius, the IRA moves from like a hierarchy to a cellular structure, where it's like groups of like 5 to 15 people who don't really know, who only know each other, don't know the other groups of 5 to 15 people in the city, and basically coordinate action together, unless it's through like Sinn Fein. And a lot of them are in Sinn Fein, but like any good Republican knows that like Jerry Adams was never in the IRA, and none of the Sinn Fein guys. Every good Republican knows that they're the 6 counties, it's Derry, not Londonderry, and Jerry Adams was never in the IRA. But yeah, I think it's like focusing on the places where we can do concrete action together, right? Like the housing action, citizens defense action, because we face a lot of the same problems: unemployment, police brutality, housing injustice. So it's like, how do we build practical alliances around actions? Because it's like, you look at Red House, right? It brought a bunch of different, for better or for worse, it brought a bunch of different people together in a unified struggle to create like a little square of free Portland, right? With barricades and rocks at the cops and all that fucking same jazz, right? And armed people inside debating about how armed and hyphy we should be, right? So like, all of the things that happened in early Northern Ireland have already happened here, and we've already had to deal with the same questions. And that's one of the things I think is fascinating. And like, I spent the last month since I picked this as a topic reading like 3.5, if I'm being honest, 3.5. I was going to say 4, but that's a lie. It's 3.5. A bunch of articles, a couple documentaries, probably at least 40 or 50 fucking Wikipedia articles. And any errors or inaccuracies in this are the product of me and my memory and the talk I put together, not anything I read. So, but yeah, I think that that's one of the big ones, is practical unity on action, and like really knowing who to target when. Because if these people are like shooting your homies, like it's kind of like hard to not like need to defend yourself. And it's also like, if you're gonna catch murder charges, are you really trying to catch murder charges for shooting other people, like other Irish Catholics, when there's like cops and Protestant Proud Boys who are doing the exact same fucking thing? And I don't know, like, it's very easy to sit here and armchair quarterback the fucking IRA. Like, it's very easy for me to do that, not being bombed and shot at. Like, but yeah, I don't know. It's hard. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
And then, yeah, lastly, I just want to say, like, are there other questions or thoughts or feelings? Don, AMG
asked if there's a Google Doc.
There is not. Actually, there is. I can share you on it if you want. If you want to put your email in the chat, I can share you it. It was mostly just my outline, but actually, I guess if I'm going to make these outlines, I could probably just like put them in the Google Doc. And yeah, I'd be happy to give this talk again with more detail as I read more shit, because I got like part of the way through this book about the counterinsurgency and like the ties between the British police, the British government, and the fucking Protestant Proud Boys, and did not have time to finish it because like I didn't really know a lot about Ireland before I started in the IRA. Before I started this, it was like car bombings. We almost got Maggie Thatcher, some fucking great folk songs, you know, ooh-ah, up the raw, like 26 plus 6 equals 1, like meme shit. And I ended up, it's like, it is a complicated set of political questions of like, how much do you participate in government? Do you do offense or defensive war? Do you arm at all? What sparks off a fucking armed struggle? How much shit are people willing to take? Wow, white people getting colonized got the same shit here. So yeah, I don't know. Does anybody have any other, does that answer your question, Mads? I don't know if you have any other thoughts or that. It's also pretty offensive. It's like, speaking of this talk, by the way, like you should tell your local bar to stop calling them Irish car bombs. Like they don't, it's like calling it an American school shooting, guys. Like it's not fucking cool. We should not do that. That is not a point that's not a political point. That's just a side note. But yeah, and I hope the songs and Bobby Sands' poem, like you should go learn more about Bobby Sands. You should go learn about Jerry Adams and Sinn Fein. Like I'm not here to pass judgment on them for picking up the gun any more than I am to pass judgment on them for putting down the gun. Those dudes fought for 30 years and like killed a lot of people and did a lot of damage and lost a lot of homies. Like they fought a real war against a real white Western government in our lifetime. And it's very easy to say, well, you shouldn't have done any of that. It's very easy to say, well, I would have done better, or I wouldn't have, or I would have. And at the end of the day, like, or you shouldn't. And I don't know, man. I think it's very easy to armchair quarterback the revolution. I think it's very easy to armchair quarterback the troubles. And that is, I'm having a hard enough time playing housing justice football here in Portland. I do not need to act like I would have made the touchdown pass in 1969, because no one person does, the people do. And like in a lot of ways, the Republicans had to adapt to the willingness of the majority of the Catholic population to support armed struggle, in which times things went very well for the IRA and the Sinn Fein, and the times that the Catholic working class was burned out and things did not go as well for them and their policy of armed struggle. So like, you're only as strong as a people, and the places where the pigs were real brutal, they were very strong, and the places where the Protestants were strong and it was a divided community, it was a divided sectarian gang-based shit fight. And a lot of the Protestant, like especially when both those groups got declared terrorists, a lot of the Provos and the Ulster Volunteers sold drugs to raise money. Like the Provos got guns from Libya and fucking communist countries. And Libya at one point, Gaddafi sent a bunch of bombs and guns to the Provos. The Ulster Volunteer Force, like I said, got money and guns from the British government and from the British Nazi Party, and were allied with elements of the British far right. There are no clean hands in the Troubles. There's nobody who like walked around and didn't hurt anybody who was innocent. There's nobody who can say that there's not blood on their hands. And I don't think there's anybody who, after like Ireland is still not united, things are better, but they're not 100% better. There was a lot of police reform, but there's still police issues there, and there's still enough dissidents on both sides that they're bombing each other, and there's more walls. So, it is a long, long, long war, and colonization is a hell of a thing. So all we can do is learn the lessons and try to be better in the future, and hopefully not hit civilians who aren't members of the Proud Boys or the police, and try to protect as many of our civilians as we can. So this is a song that got written in the late 60s, early 70s. Aw, that's beautiful, Don. Yeah, no, of course, and I appreciate that too. I quit drinking 2 years ago, and I think in the spirit of revolutionary solidarity, it's it is nice to have things to do as revolutionaries that aren't and by all means, if you are feeling the spirit, you should pour a glass of Pachin or a fucking Guinness for all the homies in the IRA who fought and shed blood for Ireland's freedom. But I think it is nice to have spaces that are alternatives to going out and getting smashed. Yeah. And I appreciate, I hope you find your roots in Ireland. I watched this dope talk by a Native woman that I'll actually put in the chat about the geography of hope, because she talks about how we're all native to a place, and basically, her name's Lila June. She's the woman. She's her first bit. She's half native and half white, and she talks about how the Lakota word for white people is the same as the word for enemy, and how she reconciles her roots as when she's supposed to be half her own enemy. And long story short, it's tracing her whiteness back to her roots as the daughter of witches, because her matrilineal mother clan native perspective is look at all the white women who were persecuted for not going along with the medicine women of Europe. And it hits really hard coming from a half red, half white Native American woman. It's a dope fucking talk. I put it in the chat. It's called The Geography of Hope, 2017, Becoming Native to a Place. Her name is Lila June. But with that all said, that's part of why I wanted to follow the Irish heritage as well, because it's as a half white person, it's I have joked for the last couple years that I'm Irish and Korean, so we're the fucking oppressed of two continents. We still remain the divided of two continents into North and South by British and American imperialism. For all, I am not here to speak well of North Korea, but for all its faults, it is at least not Western imperialist Korea. And just for all of its faults, Sinn Fein and Free Ireland are still not occupied British Ireland, and for all their faults, the dissident Republicans are still fighting. Nobody's perfect. It's a bloody war. Martin Luther King was physically abusive to women. John Lennon stole his music from black people. All of your heroes have flaws, including us. So all we can do is do our best to build a revolutionary movement. All right, so I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna fucking play this jam, and then we're gonna call this out. Zay, if you want to just stick around till after this, we can make sure the recording gets it all. So this is a song called The Broad Black Brimmer. This is a song about intergenerational trauma and never giving up the fight.
There's a uniform that's hanging in what's known as Father's room, a uniform so simple in its style. It's got no braid of gold, no silk, no hat with feathered plume, yet me mother has preserved it all the while. One day she made me try it on, a wish of mine for years, this in memory of your father dear, she said. And when I put the sound brown on, she was smiling to her tears as she placed the broad black brimmer on me head. It's just a broad black brimmer, ribbons frayed and torn by the careless whisk of many's a mountain breeze. An old trench coat that's all battle-stained and worn, and breeches almost threadbare at the knees. A sand-brown belt with a buckle big and strong, and a holster that's been empty many's a day. But not for long. But when men claim Ireland's freedom, the one should choose to lead 'em will wear the broad black brimmer of the IRA. That's a uniform be worn by my father long ago, when he reached me mother's homestead on the run. It was the uniform be worn in that little church below, when good Father Mac had blessed the parish one. And after truce and treaty and the parting of the ways, he wore it when he marched out with the rest and the best. And when they brought his body down on that rugged heather braes, they placed the broad black brimmer on his chest. It's just a broad black brimmer, ribbons frayed and torn by the careless whisk of many's a mountain breeze. An old trench coat that's all battle-stained and worn, and breeches almost threadbare at the knees. A sand-brown belt with a buckle big and strong, and a holster that's been empty many's a day, but not for long. But when men claim Ireland's freedom, the one should choose to lead 'em will wear the broad black brimmer of the IRA. But when men claim Ireland's freedom, the one should choose to lead 'em will wear the broad black brimmer of the IRA.
Yeah, some versions of that song leave out the part where it goes, but not for long. The holster that's been empty many's a day, but not for long. Some versions of that song leave out the not for long. I think it's important to keep that attitude in mind. That guy's great, by the way. That's Seth Stanton Watkins. He does like Irish and kind of like bluegrassy country stuff on YouTube, and he's fucking great. You should all, if y'all like that kind of shit, he's got more stuff there. Yeah, I like to play that kind of thing because I think culture is important. Like, these things end up part of the cultural symbolic myths of these movements, and our politics is not going to get, in the words of Emma Goldman, if your revolution can't dance, I don't want to be a part of it. So yeah, if your revolution doesn't have fucking slaps, I don't really want to be a part of it. So yeah, the ballot box and the Armalite, ooh-ah, up the raw, 26 plus 6 equals 1, and fucking death to Great Britain. Ireland will be free. Love you guys.